Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time here, I guess just welcome to the channel. I don't know. Finally getting back to doing something CFMOTO related. I know it's been a while since I've put together any videos that have anything to do with the CFMOTO stuff, and I know a lot of my subscribers are subscribed because of the CFMOTO content that I've done, but quite honestly, haven't had any issues with my machine, so I haven't had anything to make any videos about. I haven't done much or anything to it aftermarket wise, so haven't really had much. You may notice that that's not my machine back there, or you're thinking that I got a different one. I didn't. It's not mine. This machine is it's another Uforce 1000. Mine's sitting over here, but gentleman that lives kind of close by, we got kind of connected on Facebook through one of the groups. I was asking for people that may have a Uforce 1000 that would like a remote start installed. So he got a hold of me and we struck a deal, and here it is. I had posted a couple videos here and there, clips of me remote starting my machine, and there was some interest on it, so I figure I'll kind of do a video on how to install one. Unlike a lot of videos that you'll see out there for side-by-sides where guys have put remote starts on machines, they'll basically entice you thinking that they're going to show you how to install one, and all it is, hey, look at me, push this button and the thing starts. Contact us to get a remote start installed. I'm not going to do that. I understand why they do that, and I'm going to say this disclaimer right now. Do not follow this as a 100% step-by-step how to install a remote start in any side-by-side. That's not what this is. This is going to be specific for the Uforce 1000. I will give wire colors, but I can't guarantee that every single machine is going to have the exact same wire colors. Even though you can open up the book, the service manual, and it may tell you a wire color, those aren't always 100% accurate. Sometimes they use different colors from the factory. So I will kind of go through, I will show you how to test your wires before you actually make a connection so that you can ensure that you're tying into the correct wiring. I'm also going to kind of go through the specific remote start that I'm using. I'll go through and explain what all of the wires are for and kind of what their function are. Now, it could get a little bit long-winded, and I'm sure it'll be kind of boring, but it's important information so that you know what it is you're hooking up. I'll also explain the basic function of a remote start and what it is that it's actually doing. And then we'll go through after we've got it installed and kind of show you some basic programming of it, which will pertain to quite a few remote starts, but if you have a different brand, it could be completely different. You may have to have a programmer to activate features that you want, yada yada. Again, that's all on you. I don't claim any responsibility for your inabilities. So without any further ado, I have a hell of a mess going on back behind me here on my workbench, so I gotta kind of clean that crap up, and probably won't get into this too much tonight, but you won't know because the video will just clip, you know, to me doing it. It's probably going to be a longer video. I apologize if you guys don't like the longer videos, but it is what it is. I will try to speed things up. Probably not going to go into great detail of showing you how everything is taken apart on these, but I'll try to stop, you know, and not completely glass over some of the details to it. So, you know, and some of it, if you aren't even putting a remote start in your machine, it might be helpful information to have, you know, for taking stuff apart and doing any other service work. So, moving right along, we'll get started on it next thing you know, but it'll probably be tomorrow for me. But you'll see I'm probably going to be wearing basically the same clothes because I'm still in work clothes, and, well, I have a job where I work tomorrow too. So that's how that goes. So anyway, stick around and check it out with me. Alright guys, so let's get into this remote start. What we're going to be installing on this unit is an Avital remote start. This is the model 4000 XL. Now, it is 2022 right now, just barely. It's January of 2022. And when you see this video come out, if you're familiar with remote starts, you might go, well, that's an old unit. It is. This is a few years old, but it is brand new, still in the box. I've got a stack of remote starts sitting in my garage because I used to do this professionally for 20 years. So this is a brand new unit. It's just been sitting on a shelf. The Avital brand is one of the brands made by Directed Electronics. Since this was made, Directed Electronics has been bought by another company. I think it's AudioVox bought them out or something. I can't remember for sure. But in this era of Directed Electronics equipment and going back to probably mid-90s or so, they're all kind of set up basically the same. As the years went by, they added features. You get, further range with better remotes and two-way and all that stuff. Up to now, you can get them with an app that you can use on your phone. But for our purposes right here, we're going to stick with the basic remote start. And I went with the Avital not only because I have one, but because I know they're a reliable unit made by a company that puts out good quality stuff. Stay away from the crap that's on the shelf at the parts stores or Walmart or whatever weird website nobody's ever heard of. Stay away from those. Stick with a brand that you know and trust. If you're putting it on any vehicle, side by side, car, truck, whatever, stick with a name brand. If you are not comfortable doing the work, then have it done professionally. That's all I can say. But anyway, let's open this up and see what we got. This is going to basically go for almost any remote start out there. You're going to have a brain. This one has the remote still tied onto it. This is what I think Directed Electronics refers to this as the primary harness. You've got your heavy gauge relay harness. I think they refer to this as the remote start harness. You'll have a valet button or a programming button, I guess is what this is. An antenna cable. And this is your antenna. It does also come with a couple of other things here we'll touch on briefly. They all come with this, or most of them come with a pin switch that if you were installing this on a car would go underneath the hood so that it can't remote start if the hood is open. If you're putting this on a car, make sure you put a hood pin on there. It is important. You don't want your mechanic having his hand in the engine bay and then the remote in his pocket and bumps it and remote starts it with his arms in the engine bay. So if you're doing a car, make sure you use that. They also come with I think they refer to it, or Directed Electronics refers to it as a neutral safety switch. It's basically a kill switch for the remote start. If you can't use a hood pin switch, then at least put in some sort of a kill switch so that the mechanic can disable the system basically if they're working on it. Most of them will come with a owner's guide. This would be what you would give to a customer that basically just tells them how the unit works, all that good stuff. It's good information to have, but I think this day and age, most of us are pretty familiar with, how a remote works for a car. And then you're going to end up with your actual install guide. Now, you'll notice when you open up these install guides, they are not vehicle specific because the remote start is not vehicle specific. This is just a generic guide that tells you what the wires of this system does. And this is what you need to use to familiarize yourself with their terminology. When we open it up here, it'll tell you the different harnesses and then the different wire colors, and then what they actually do. So, like I said, or maybe I didn't, I don't remember, but of all of these wires that we've got sitting here, we're not going to use all of them. In fact, we're probably only going to use about half of them because this application does not require all of them. Go through them kind of one by one. I'll give you a quick rundown of what it means, even if we aren't using them in this instance. That way you're familiar come programming time, or if you're looking at this video but you want to put something, a remote start in an actual vehicle, not a power sports equipment, some of these might be useful for you. So we'll start with the primary harness. They obviously are not labeled on the harness that this is the primary harness, but you can go through the list and it'll tell you the different wire colors and what they are, so that you can tell it. Like this harness, it's the only one with a green wire with a black tracer. So speaking of the light green and black, this would be for a factory alarm disarm. If you were putting a car in that had a factory alarm system, you don't want the alarm going off when every time it remote starts, so you would need this wire. The green with white wire is for the factory alarm rearm. This will rearm the factory alarm after the remote start sequence. Your yellow wire is an ignition output, but this is only needed if you're hooking this up to an existing aftermarket alarm system. White with blue is the activation input. If for some reason you wanted to hook this thing up where you pulse a ground signal to it so many times and it'll remote start, say you want to use the factory key fob or an aftermarket key fob for an aftermarket alarm that's already installed, you could hook this up to an output on that, and then through a sequence of pulses to this wire, it'll start the remote start sequence. Gray with black is a wait to start input. This would be if you were installing this on a diesel where you have to wait for glow plugs to warm up. This would go to the light on the dash for your glow plugs, and then when it sees the signal drop out through this wire, it knows to start the remote start sequence then. Your white with red is your positive activation input. Does the same thing as that white with blue. I forgot to mention white with blue is negative activation. White with red is positive activation. Your red with white would be a negative output to go to a trunk release relay, or if your vehicle has a low current negative trunk release signal in it, you could tie this into that to use for power trunk release. So far, we haven't gotten to any wire that we're going to use in this. Until this one. This is black. This is your main brain ground. This one we need. Then your white wire is your parking light output. This will do either positive triggered or negative trigger parking lights, and you control which it is via a little jumper that's on the side of this. We know we want the parking lights to flash on this unit when we go to remote start it. But is it a positive trigger or is it a negative trigger? We don't know yet because we haven't tested it, but we do know that we need this wire. So out of this harness that has 9 wires in it, we only need 2 of them. So kind of get the point that not everything is used. The next harness that it goes through is your 4-pin satellite relay harness. I didn't even take that out of the box. We aren't using that at all. That would be if your vehicle has like 3 ignition wires that have to be triggered. This brain only has 2 of them that have built-in relays, so it gives you a low current signal to trigger an external relay. Like I said, we aren't using that on this, so I'm not going to go into it too much. The next harness in this unit is going to be the heavy gauge relay wiring. These are kind of your main power wires into the remote start. So, if I can get them untangled. It's got 6 wires in it, again, for this particular model. And it'll go through them color by color again. Pink is a 30 amp output to your ignition. Purple is going to be a 30 amp output to your starter. Orange is a 30 amp output to your accessories. Pink with white is going to be a 30 amp output to a second ignition wire. So if your vehicle has two ignition sources, or when you turn the key on you have two ignition wires in there, you don't want to just tie them together, so you'll use not only the first pink, but you use this pink with white. And then both of your reds are your power coming into the actual unit. As far as which wires out of this we're going to use will depend on what we test for in the actual unit itself. Now, since I've already done one in mine, I already know what it is, but I'm not going to tell you until we go through and test the wires in that. Next harness in the book's your door lock harness. Again, didn't even get that out of the box. We don't have power door locks on this, so it doesn't matter. It's two wires. They're both negative outputs. One is lock, one is unlock. If you don't have negative door locks on your vehicle, then you have to use those to trigger relays. If you want information on wiring relays, check out one of my other videos. I've got a little 3-video series about basic automotive and power sports wiring, and one of those videos, I think it's the 3rd video, kind of touches on relay wiring and what a relay is and what it does. Our last harness is what Directed Electronics refers to as the remote start harness. We will have a black with white wire, small gauge. This, if you were doing a vehicle that doesn't need an external neutral safety switch, then you would just ground this wire to allow the unit to remote start. If you're doing a vehicle that doesn't have a built-in neutral safety switch, I'm thinking it's like mid-90s Cavaliers and maybe some Dodge trucks or something didn't have them, so you had to hook this up. Most vehicles you don't need to actually hook it up to a wire in the vehicle, but this wire does have to see ground in order for the remote start to activate. The other purpose of this is to tie it onto this switch. Now, on this side-by-side, we don't have a hood that opens, so we can't really use the hood pin switch. We could, but and we could put it on the bed so that if the bed is tilted up, it won't remote start. But I don't really care to use those push button hood pins, if at all possible, because they have a tendency to corrode, and then they don't work. So we're going to, in this instance, we're going to install the on-off toggle switch and let the owner know where it's located, so if he takes it in for service at his dealer or anything like that, he can let them know to be able to shut it off, or he can shut it off before he drops it off. So this black with white wire, in short, we are going to use. Next wire is going to be purple with white. This is the tach signal. This is what tells the remote start, hey, the vehicle is started and running, stop cranking. Now, most remote starts, you can hook them up tackless or voltage sense so that it knows when it isn't, or when it is and isn't running, so that it can, you know, shut off the starter so it doesn't grind it or overrun it or anything like that. I always like to, if the tach wire can be gotten to, I like to hook this up. I think it makes for more accurate functionality. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to use that. Next wire is small gauge brown. This is going to be your brake input. If you're unfamiliar with how a remote start works, when you get in the vehicle after remote starting it, you have to put the key in the ignition, turn it to the on position. If you don't do anything else and you turn the key back off, that vehicle's still going to stay running. The purpose of this brown wire is so that it can sense when the brake pedal gets pressed and it knows that it needs to shut down. Kind of serves a twofold purpose. For one, if somebody gets in it without the key, they can't hit the brake and shift it into gear and drive off with it like we naturally do when we get in a vehicle anymore. Or as soon as they do hit the brake to slow down or stop, it's going to stall the engine. But mainly anymore these days, it's just to shut the remote, start off, and let the vehicle take over when you get in it and start driving it. Our gray wire here is going to be the hood pin input. Like I said, we aren't using the hood pin on this. We're going to use that neutral safety switch or kill switch instead, so we won't be using the gray. And then the blue with white wire is going to be a, they refer to it as a second status or rear defroster output. In the programming, you can change the functionality of this. You can either have it turn on or send a signal out of the brain after remote starting to trigger your defrost in a vehicle. Obviously that doesn't have it. Or it'll be ground, it'll put out a ground signal anytime it's running, which could be used to trigger a bypass module or something like that if it had some sort of immobilizer system on it. Again, this vehicle doesn't have that, so we don't need the blue with white. So 5-pin harness, we're going to use 3 of the wires out of it. That is all of the wires that we're going to use out of this unit. I'm going to get some stuff taken apart on this and expose some of the wiring, show you where that is. I'll kind of point out where the bolts are in case you aren't familiar, so that you know how to take stuff apart on it, but I'm not going to film the entire disassembly because nobody's got time for that. So we'll do that, and I'll show you how to test for all the wiring, and then we will work on doing a bench prep of the wiring with this. Nobody wants to look under the dash and just see that underneath there. So once we have everything tested and we know what wires we do and don't need for sure, and kind of where they're located at, will help us to prep this and make it so it actually looks professional when it's installed. All right, inside the side-by-side, I got my little magnetic pointer here. I already took the seat bottoms out. Didn't figure I needed to explain that. If you don't know how to take those out, this job is way above your head, because they just pull out basically. Anyway, because I've done this before and I know how to get the wiring around in here, I'm going to go ahead and say you do need to take out this center piece right here. Comes out pretty easily. There are 4 10mm bolts. You got one right there, one up there, same thing over on the other side of the hump. And then this will just lift right off. We are also going to have to get access to the ignition switch, the light switch here, and I've got some other stuff to do under here for them as well. That'll be in another video. So long story short, this piece has to come out. It goes all the way across. It's not that bad to take out. The one thing that kind of sucks is your winch control right here. At least on my machine, that cable is not very long, so this doesn't drop out of the way very far, but it's manageable. So to take this thing out, you've got 3 10mm bolts on this side. Hopefully the light is good enough here, but we've got one right up top, up here. In fact, you can't see that, but it's right up there. You've got 1 10mm bolt right there, and one down there. Over on the other side, you've got one down low here, just like on the other side. And then the 2 that on this side, you've got one up there and one right up there. Take those 10mm bolts out. Then you have screws that are along the bottom side of this lip. got one here right on the corner. You've got two in the center here, one right here and one right there. They're both below your power ports here. To get at those, you have to take this out. This just grab it and pull it straight out. It's got plastic clips. The plastic clips may fall off of this, and then they'll end up down on the floor, and then you can just clip them back onto this. You've got one screw right here just to the right of the steering column, one just to the left of the steering column, and one right here. Remove all those screws and this whole piece right here will drop out. Underneath the bed here in the engine bay, we've got a couple wires. We're going to tie our tack wire in back here so the vehicle or the remote start knows when the vehicle is running. And then we're also going to catch our brake wire in this harness that goes back to the bed here. I have not looked for anywhere up front, anywhere up in this area to tie in a brake switch, and I've already got to do another project back here that ties into the brake wire, so I'm just going to go ahead and do it back here because I got to get wires that way anyway. So I'll get all this stuff torn apart, and then I'll kind of show you how to test for some of this stuff and explain why it is we need it. All right, as you can see, we've got the center hump floor taken out, and then we have the lower dash drop down. Like I said, the winch plug wires on these are super short, and they're kind of back inside there. See if I can get a light in there. Right there at the end of the flashlight is the winch cable, and it kind of comes through and it's tucked tight. Whatever, I'm not gonna screw around with taking it out any further than that. We can get access to what we need from here. So your ignition wires are gonna be in this bundle right here, and you can tell because they go up to the back side of the ignition. If you look back in there, there's a gray plug that they're attached to. There's 4 wires in it. And then your parking light wires, I already unplugged them, but I just unhooked the switch from the harness there. It's back inside here, right here. I just unclipped it to make it easier to get to them. They've got this rubber sheathing on it. We need to cut that off so that we can actually get at the wires in there. Want to be careful cutting this off of here and off of here that you don't nick up the wires and make a mess with it, but we do need to expose the wires in there. So I'll get those cut off and then bring you back in to see that. All right, so I've got the sheathing cut off now. You'll notice I left a little bit of it going up to the actual switch up there, but I went ahead and I cut it off all the way back to the plug. That gives me plenty of wire to work with down here. And when we're all said and done, we'll put some wire loom over that and make it all pretty again. The parking lights, I went ahead and took those off, or took the wire harness off all the way back to the plug there. That way I've got some wire to work with. I did plug the switch back in because we'll have to have that plugged in order to test for it. Now, in order to test for it, if you don't want to strip each wire individually and test for it, then you can actually get to the back side of the switch up there and probe the terminals on the switch. They're exposed up there. You can probe them up inside there and do all of your testing that way. So that's kind of what we're going to do. I'm going to get you set up on a tripod so that you can actually see as I test this. I will tell you from experience that the switches on these for the lights, you have to have the machine turned on in order for you to test for them. But the center position is off, like it's sitting right now. Up is your parking lights, and then down all the way. He might need to get a new switch because this is not functioning. Oh, there it clicked into place. Yeah, you shouldn't have to pry on the top and push on the bottom to turn those on. I'm going to let the customer know that he should probably get a hold of CFMOTO and see about getting a new switch for that. Knowing that now brings up a good point. If you're going to do any sort of wiring, you want to try to do the wiring on the other side of that harness that's back in there so that they need to replace this switch. They aren't messing with your wiring. So we'll test for it, but then I think our joints are going to be on the other side of that plug, not on the pigtail I exposed right here. So that way they can just unplug it and plug a new one in for them. So let me get you set up on a tri-stand and I'll show you how to test for this stuff. All right, this is going to be a little bit awkward because I have the camera between me and what I'm working on, but we'll try this, try to make this as good as possible. We've got 4 wires sitting here at the parking light switch. That's what we're going to start with just because that's what's closest to me. We have a white with a blue stripe, a brown, a green with a black stripe, and then a black with a brown stripe that splits into 2 different terminals up in there. I don't recall tying into one that splits off into 2, so I'm going to skip testing that one. But we'll go with the next easiest one. It looks like the bottom terminal is a green with black. We'll go ahead and see what that tests out as. I gotta set the light down because I only got 2 hands here, so gotta set her down. Or maybe, I don't know, it's magnetic. Maybe this will work. Doubtful. You won't be able to see what I'm actually doing, but I'm just touching the terminal on the back of the switch. All right, my meter is telling me that this is a ground signal right now, but we should probably turn on the machine to test. I've just got the key rolled to the on position. All right, still a ground signal. If we push it up into the parking light position, it does not change. So what that probably is probably the ground for the lights on the switch. So we know that's not it. Moving up to the next one. This is going to be the brown wire. All right, this has 12 volts on it. This is in the off position up here. We're going to click it up into the parking light section, and it goes to ground. Turn it off, it goes back to 12 volts. Now if we turn on our headlights, no change. Back to center, still has 12 volts. Up to parking lights, goes to ground. So that is our parking light wire. It's going to be the brown wire. Like I said, we're going to try and tie on back behind this plug so it doesn't actually get in the way of them replacing that switch, since we found that it's kind of faulty. So we're going to trace that wire to the other side of the plug. And okay, looks like it's brown on that side too. You want to watch out. Sometimes they switch colors at the plug. So we'll tie it onto the brown back in here so that way they can pull this switch out, unplug it, and just click a new one in, be good to go. So we'll make note of that. Our parking lights are brown and they're negative trigger. Like I said when I went over the wiring, our light output on the remote start is selectable for either positive or negative lights. We want to set it up for negative. Moving over to the ignition. See if I can shift you guys over and get you a little bit better view. More than likely, being that this is such a simple vehicle, there's 4 wires at the ignition. More than likely, all of them will be used in our instance, but we need to know how they test to know what we're wiring up. Common to a lot of vehicles is that the red is going to be your constant positive. So we'll go ahead and shut the ignition back off. I'm going to just make a little poke into that. And that's actually ground, or it reads as a ground right now. So that's not our 12 volts. I don't know if that's showing up on the camera or not. So let's try another one, because our red and our black are both heavier gauge wires, so one of those should be power. Let's try the black. There we go, that's our 12 volt constant. When we turn the key on, it doesn't change. I mean, it'll drop because of additional load. Yep, cranking, it doesn't change. So, okay, black is our constant 12 volts. So then let's figure out what this red is. It oddly reads 0.7 volts right now. That makes no sense, but it could be picking up some stray voltage. Turn the key on, goes to 12.7. Now, if this keeps voltage through the cranking process, that'll be an ignition wire. And it did. So, red is going to need to be powered up as an ignition. Moving on to our yellow wire. Try to poke this without stabbing my own finger. This is reading nothing, not ground, not powered, nothing. Roll the key on. It then goes to ground. Then as we crank it, all right, it goes to 12 volts while we're cranking it and stays 12 volts until we release the key. So that is our starter wire. So yellow is starter. Last wire is gray with red. This one gets some stray voltage too. Nope, she died off. Must be capacitors that are holding some charge. So it's ground now. Roll the key on, goes to 12 volts. And then what does it do when we crank? It stays powered through cranking, so this is also an ignition wire. This would be our second ignition. So 12 volts black, first ignition red, gray with red is going to be our second ignition, and yellow is our starter wire. Perfect. We'll move along to the back, and I'll show you where the brake wire is. All right, to test the brake light on this, it's kind of a pain because first off, the key has to be turned to the on position, otherwise the brake lights don't work. And second of all, you're trying to test stuff back here and then going up front with a stick or whatever and pressing the brake pedal to turn the lights on. So kind of have to be a little bit patient, I guess would be the word to use. Easiest place I found to test these is at this harness right here. This is the harness that I mentioned earlier that plugs into the bed so that the bed can be removed. If you unplug this harness, obviously your brake lights aren't going to work because they're unplugged now, but the wire will still work at the plug. I'm not going to go through and individually test every single wire because I already know what wire it is. I'll just tell you right now. It's the green with the yellow stripe on this machine, at least. So the easiest thing to do so that you're not popping fuses and accidentally touching stuff together that you're not supposed to, when you get this plug out right here, is just make a little jumper wire, use a real small female spade terminal, and you can, in this case, I know it's the green with yellow, figure out what pin that's in, and you can slip it right over it, plug it in, and then you can actually, you've got a wire, you're not sticking your probe in there and touching across the different terminals. In this instance, I've got the key turned on right now, put my meter on it, it reads nothing, and then I'll block the camera completely here, or actually, let me move you into a better position. So you can see that right now it's at 0 volts. Now when I hit the brake pedal, it'll go to 12. When you let off, it goes back to 0. That's your brake wire. That being said, you can follow this harness all the way back to right here. There's your green with yellow. You can tie your brake wire right onto there. All right, the last wire that we need for the remote start to fully function is going to be our tack wire. There's a couple of places that you can get this. You might be able to get it at the ECM, but we're already bringing wires to the back here. So I found the easiest place to get it is right at one of the 2 coils. You've got one coil right here, and then there's another one up there. If you look at both of the coils, they've got 3 wires on them. 2 of them are going to be the same color. And then the third one in the middle is going to be your tack signal. Now there is a way to test this. If you hook up a digital multimeter to it and set it to AC voltage, start the car, or in this case the side-by-side, you'll have your ground, your black terminal on ground, and then your red terminal on what you suspect to be the tack wire set to AC voltage. You should see a fluctuation up and down of the voltage as you rev the engine up and down. That's going to be your tack signal. But that's where we'll tie in our tack wire. So now that we've found all of our wiring that we're going to be using in the vehicle, we know that our parking lights are negative. We know that we need 2 ignitions, the starter wire, and power. Now we're ready to actually go back to the workbench and prep this and get it ready to install. So I'll bring you back around for that and go from there. Hey guys, it's the next day. I'm going to apologize right now. I got off work and I came out to the garage and I just started going with this remote start. Completely forgot to actually record any of it because I'm still not used to recording everything I do. But either way, I stopped myself before I got too far. I'll kind of go over what I've got, just started bench wiring the remote start. So we'll get you turned around here, show you what I did, kind of explain it. I'll skip over the prettying up of the wires because that's pretty much boring crap that you don't really need to see. If you can't figure it out, then I can't help you. So get you turned around, kind of show you what we got going on. All right, obviously I did not clean off my workbench like I said I was going to. It is still a disaster out here, but we're doing it anyway. I've got the brain just kind of screwed down with a couple of drywall screws up in the corner to keep it from shifting around while I work on stuff. You'll notice here that I've gotten all of the wiring that we aren't using taken out of the plugs, both this primary plug here and the small remote start plug. You'll also notice I am not using the harness that that comes with it, and the reason for that, and some guys don't like to see people do this, but the reason that I'm doing that is that the wires that are in the machine are a relatively small gauge wire, and if you use a large gauge wire on this, it has a tendency to break strands in the wire, and we don't need the current handling ability that this harness has. We don't need to carry 30 amps on the main power wire because obviously from the factory it's not drawing 30 amps, so that would be much bigger wire at the ignition in there. So we've put some different fuse holders in. We're going to fuse it down a little bit and size the fuses in these holders appropriately to the size wire that we're running so it's protected properly. And then they're just spade connectors inside the harness there, so I just use some crimp-on heat shrink spade connectors and popped them into their appropriate spaces. I ran out of pink wire, and those are our ignition wires, so what I used is yellow, and then I put a black tracer on the second ignition wire, and because yellow is another common aftermarket color for ignition, so it'll be easy to remember. Other than that, all the colors that we're using are the same. We have power wire, purple is our starter wire, and then again the two yellows are our ignition. Plain yellow is ignition 1, yellow with black stripe is ignition 2. And to be honest with you, these are interchangeable. You could hook up one to the other, and in the machine it's not going to matter. It won't know the difference. The rest of the wires I just kind of brought around this, kind of got this far, and then I stopped myself, but this will all be taped up nice and bundled together and everything. The tape that I'm using on this is a cloth tape. It's a Tessa tape. I'm big on trying to match whatever is in the machine that you're working on, but in something like a side-by-side where you get a lot of vibration, with the vibration comes potential for abrasion, and the cloth tape holds up a lot better to abrasion than a standard electrical tape. So any electrical connections that we make in the vehicle will be using regular electrical tape to insulate them, and then any bundling of our wiring or anything will be with the cloth tape. Anyway, moving on. With our other smaller wires, we have our white parking light wire, our brown brake wire, and I have extended these. I've soldered some extensions on because I know that they're too short just because of where stuff is going to have to be placed. We have our ground wire right here. And it's hard because I'm trying to hold the camera here. Ground wire is going to go obviously to the ground, but I have tied on I spliced it in and soldered on an extension to the ground, and also on our neutral safety switch I have extended that out and lengthened it because I'm going to put that on-off switch underneath the seat so that it doesn't get bumped accidentally and kind of protected, and it's not some ugly switch on the dash. When you put in these switches, you don't have to extend both the ground wire and the neutral safety wire back to the switch or whatever. You can just run the neutral safety wire to your switch location and then tie the other wire of your switch to a ground, but doing it this way in this instance is going to make for a cleaner install, and you'll see that when it's all said and done. But like I said, other than that, I've just kind of extended wires. I'm going to end up running an extension on my tack wire because I know this is too short just because of how we have to route it in this machine to keep it out of the way. But that's all I'm going to do with this. There's not much to really show with it. I'm going to get stuff kind of extended, kind of sorted out, because since we went through the machine and we know where everything is, we kind of have an idea then of what wires can be grouped together, routed in the same direction, all that stuff. So I'm going to get that taken care of. I'll come back to you and show you the finished product, or the ready to install product. All right, so I got our wires bundled up, and this is the finished product. But it's ready to install. Everything is taped up, all the wires go in the same direction. You'll notice I have the valet switch or the programming switch just plugged in. It's not unbundled or anything. I am not a big fan of mounting these where customers have access to them. And some people may disagree with this, some may not, but once I set the settings, I don't want them in there screwing around with them, because I know how everything needs to be set. 95% of the customers do not. So I'll program it, I'll leave it. A lot of times I'll leave it in there, but it's tucked up high with the brain where it's not easily accessible. The antenna, on a normal vehicle, you would mount this up on the windshield for the best possible range, but these are not made for power sports, so you don't want this getting direct rained on or anything like that. So this is going to stay underneath the dash on this unit and just kind of bundled up and put up out of the way where it's not going to get rained directly on or anything. Same with the brain. My unit has a cab on it, so I haven't had any issues with it. Hopefully we can get this tucked up where it's not going to be getting rained on, because again, they're not made for that. But anyway, so we've got it all taped up here. We've got one bundle, because we know all these wires go to the same area. This is all of our ignition wires. We've got our ground wire here. We've got our parking light wire here, and I have wrapped the parking light wire with the cloth tape as well, and I just got a little excessive with the length on it because I couldn't remember how much I needed in my machine, but I didn't bother wasting the tape to tape it the whole way. And then I've got the bundle that's going to go towards the back of the unit, and I only wrapped this up to a certain point where I know it's going to get out from underneath the where it's basically going to exit through the quote-unquote firewall, and then from that point on it's going to be covered in split loom, but it is excessively long, so whatever. Next step is going to be mounting the brain. We're just going to zip tie it up underneath the dash, basically where we want it to go, and then we can get all of our wiring kind of routed around in the dash where we need to, and then we'll start actually making some connections. All right, I'm going to do my best now to get you guys some actual visuals on this so you can see where stuff is. Obviously this shot is below the dash. Up here are your two power ports. There's a metal crossbar that runs all the way across the dash. I've got it zip tied up to that, and all of my wires run across over towards the steering column, stay above this this here shifter cable right here, and then I've got all of my wires routed there. These wires right here are just kind of looped down. They go out through where the gas pedal is, and I'll readjust and get a little bit better shot. But at this point, I've just got stuff kind of loosely in place, kind of halfway routed where it needs to go. If I can get you moved over here. There goes flashlight. I know this isn't the smoothest of moves here. On the other side of the steering column here, this is where the wires are coming through, and if you get up in there, you can kind of see some of the factory wiring up there. Your best bet is to try and get that out of the camera shot. Try to follow your factory wiring as closely as possible. You've got stuff in here that moves. This is the steering knuckle right here. You don't want to be in that with your ignition wires and everything. And once we get our wires tied in, we'll tie those back up to the other harness running in there to kind of keep things away from it. But again, these are our ignition wires. They're routed down through there. This is our parking light wire, kind of routed in the same direction. Ground wire I brought through this area because this whole metal frame is a ground. We can ground it anywhere in there and it'll work just fine. And then the other wires that go out are routed down. It's hard to do with my fat hands here. They're routed down through the bracing and everything and looped around and then through that opening out the firewall. When we get to that, I'll kind of show you. Let's get the rest of this crap wired up and cleaned up and move on. Earlier we tested everything out, yesterday for me, earlier in the video for you. But we know that our black wires are constant. I'm going to snip this out of the way, just because it's closer to the camera. I don't want it focusing on that or doing something weird. And then all you get is a blob to look at, even though I know that a lot of this with my hands is going to be a blob to look at. Check out my other videos. I kind of go over some of the tools that I use. These are Gardner Bender wire strippers. But as you can see, you can go into the middle of a wire and splice or strip off just the insulation. I'm not sure if that's really showing up, but it pushes back the insulation so that you can get in. To make the connections in the middle of the wire, once you've got it stripped back, just take a scratch owl or a pick tool or something. You can just poke a hole in the middle of the strands. This is our 12-volt wire. Now, I don't have any fuses in the actual fuse holders yet, and I forgot to kind of point it out when I went over what I did on the bench, but I take the two positive wires and combine them into one in this instance. They don't need, I mean, they've got one 12-volt constant here. There's no need for two separate ones for your remote start. Get this stuff kind of out of the way. And of course, I forgot my regular wire strippers. Bear with me a second. All right, we're back. I like to hold the wires up together, and I'll use the end of my thumb there to mark where I need to start stripping it. And I know I need about that much wire right there, so I just chop her off. Strip it back, drop the strippers, make really loud noises. Sorry if you're wearing headphones watching this. Stick it through the hole. And give her a wrap around like that. Technically, we could tape that and it would be fine. Some people would question that, but technically, according to the MECP guidelines, which is the Mobile Electronics Certified Professional guidelines, that is a adequate splice right there. But we are going to go ahead and solder it. I've, of course, not planning this. Well, I mean, I planned it, but not planning well. Left my soldering gun over out of reach, so let me grab that. We'll get that soldered and taped up. I'm telling you, the whole videoing stuff while you're doing it really makes you lose track of what you're doing. It's like a whole nother aspect of it that you don't really, it's not natural. Make sure that you're using a good quality electrical tape. I talked about it in one of my other videos. 3M Super 33 Plus is probably the best vinyl electrical tape on the market right now. And make sure when you're wrapping wires that you're wrapping them tight. You don't want that stuff to fall off in there and leave that exposed. So that's how you make the ignition wires. Basically, you just follow it up, do the other ones the same way. Again, we've got 2 ignition wires, the 1 starter wire, and that'll take care of these. I'm gonna move this camera out of the way. I'm not gonna go through and do each wire individually. We've already tested it. I've already given you the wire colors, so we don't need to do that. I'm gonna get these made up the rest of the way, and then I'll bring you back, show you what it looks like. Alright, I got all of our ignition wires tied in. Everything is routed up with the factory ignition wires. We can then put some wire loom over that and then tuck everything back. I kind of skipped ahead a little bit just because it's hard to get a camera in and film it. But we've got our parking light wire and our ground wire routed around. The parking light wire comes up and then ties onto another harness that goes up towards where our actual parking light wires that we're tying into are. And then the ground wire I brought around and grounded it right here on the dash frame with a self-tapping Phillips screw with a star washer and then a heat shrink ring terminal on it. And I'm not sure if I can get the I'm sure I can't really get the camera in. The harness for that light switch is in here. I actually brought the wire up through here and then back down through this rubber shrouding that they put in and tied on back behind the actual switch connection so that the customer can not have any issues with getting the switch replaced. They just got to unplug it and plug the new one back in. Now I went ahead and I put some covering back over the switch so it's, you know, basically back to the factory style. That pretty much concludes everything that we're doing inside the actual cab of the machine here. We're gonna do a little bit more zip tying and get the wires that go outside routed out. Alright, so looking back at the wires that I showed earlier, you can see I've got some wire loom on them. They're tied off to the wires on the throttle pedal there so that they are held in place and not just flopping around. Following it up gives clearance around everything that could move and whatnot. On the outside here, again, camera angles are kind of hard to show, but let me switch my flashlight here. I'll see if I can point to it with it. Those wires come through right here, right above the gas pedal, or brake master cylinder bracket right here. Through the hole in the master cylinder bracket, everything is tie wrapped on there. They come around, and then it's strapped to the frame right here along with all the other wiring, brake lines, all that stuff. And then you can follow it, goes all the way back through the hump in the firewall, all zip tied back inside. Follows along these wires, zip tied to them. Getting zip ties down in there is tricky, but it can be done. Then they come up, and right now they're just sitting. I stopped it right there, just for right now. What I've got here, these are our wires, those black wires that I had for our neutral safety switch and the ground that I extended from up front. What I did is I installed a weather pack plug on the end of those right here, and then the other end of it I installed our on-off toggle switch for our safety. What I'm going to end up doing is probably drilling that in right back in here wherever I've got clearance, so that he can have his on-off switch next to the OBD2 plug right there. And then the whole reason I put the connector on the end of it is that way if he takes it into his mechanic or anything, if for some reason they have to remove any of this, you know, they might remove it to do valve adjustment or anything like that. That way this can be unplugged. They don't have to snip the wires or anything, you know, or it's not tethered to the machine. So what I'm going to end up doing is continuing the wire loom on the brake wire and the tack wire. We'll get that all strapped up, follow along all the factory looming in there, and we'll get it back to back in the back there. When I get that all buttoned up and kind of tied up, bring you back to that, show you that. Alright, so we've got everything finished up back here, except for this is our brake wire connection. I don't have this soldered yet, and I'm not going to. This gentleman wants me to install turn signals on his machine, so I'm going to have to get back into this wire harness anyway. So just for testing purposes and to show you guys where it is, that's why it's like this. I've just moved it so it's not going to touch any metal or anything while we're testing. And then when I get into the turn signals, that'll all be changed. The tack wire, however, is brought around, tied up, goes into the #1 coil pack right there. I think I misspoke earlier. I said it was the center wire in there. It is not. It is the black with blue stripe. It would be the one furthest to the passenger side of the machine. That's going to be your tack wire. I misspoke. For some reason I was thinking it was the center one on mine, but it wasn't. If you wanted to go to the other coil pack for some reason, which is back in there somewhere, not real easily accessible, it's black with yellow on that one. And you could also go to a fuel injector, but the easiest place is that black with blue over there. So at this point, we're ready to actually start programming this and making sure everything works. Let me grab this manual real quick here. I'll kind of go over this real briefly. I'm not going to get too in depth on it because your system that you install may be different, but for most directed electronic systems, this is going to be pretty standard. The tack learning procedure, we're just going to start it up with the key, press and hold that little push button switch until the LED light on the brain of the remote start lights up solid, and then we'll release it. Once it's lit solid, then it knows what tack signal it's looking for, and will work from there. The options or the features that can be changed on it, we're not going to be changing a whole lot of this. A lot of it has to do with door locks and if you have a diesel and stuff like that, which we have neither of those. But what we are going to change is our runtime. From the factory, this is set for a 12-minute runtime. I always set them to 24 minutes. You could also go 60 minutes, or if you have a bit writer programmer, you can change it anywhere you want. But with the push button, it's 12, 24, or 60 minutes. I like to go with 24 minutes. The parking light output from the manufacturer, it comes where it flashes the parking lights while it's running. I like to have them on constant, so we're going to change that. And then I believe that is the only two features that we're going to change on this. To do the feature changes, we're going to turn the ignition on, then back off, and then we'll press that push button, same number of times corresponding with the feature we want to change, and then press and hold it. It'll bring us to that feature, and then we'll hit on this remote. It's going to be the trunk button. That's the channel 2 button. We'll press that, and that will change the setting. It'll just bump it up through the different options. So let me get you set up underneath the dash. Hopefully I can get you in view of the brain so you can see the actual magic happening, and we'll test this sucker out and make sure it works. Alright, hopefully you can see what we got going on here. This is just on the passenger side, looking up underneath the dash. This is our push button that we had plugged in, just left dangling for right now. Before I'm done, I will strap this and the antenna up so they're not just hanging. But that's our push button. Our LED is right above where that plugs in. And bear with me, it's been a little while since I've programmed a directed electronics piece. And I know it is a little bit of a timed sequence here. So we're going to start with the tack. Got the key in, and we're going to start it up. Once the machine's running and it's gotten a good idle, press and hold the button, and we got a constant red LED up there. Let off it, we hear a click, we know that we're good to go on that. So that's our tack, that's all there is to that. Now for our other stuff, we're going to change our runtime and our parking light output. So, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to do this around the camera. There's not a whole lot of room in here. Shocking. Alright, we're going to turn the key on, then back off. We want to change feature number 3. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, then press and hold. Oops, flashes 3 times. Press that button, and it should be switched. Press it one more time for feature 4, press and hold, should flash 4 times. Hit our trunk button, that should be good, that should change our parking light output. At that point, to exit programming, turn the key on, turn it back off. We got the key out of the ignition now. We'll take you outside of the unit. We'll see what she does. All right, 1, 2, lights flash. There you go. This is a good time to actually test and make sure that all of your safety features work. So with it remote started and no key in the ignition, we should be able to hit the brake pedal and it should shut down. Yep, that works. Perfect. And then we can go over to the on-off switch that I installed. And I just put it next to the OBD2 connector here. We'll switch that to the off position. We'll try it again. Nothing happens. Perfect. So all of our safety features work on it. She remote starts fine. Lights stay on constant while it's running instead of some weird flash. We're all good to go. Alright, your final things that you're going to do is you're going to finish cleaning up all of your wiring. Make sure everything is zip tied up neat, tucked out of the way. As you can see, I did go ahead and cover up the ignition wiring there. Everything is tied back. All the wiring looks good. It's all tied up, nice and clean, out of the way of anything that moves. And I did go ahead and I tied up the antenna and the push button too. Last thing, and I get some crap about this from some guys because I know a lot of them don't put them in. All the remote starts come with a warning label. That lets your mechanic know that somebody's put a remote start in the unit and that there should be some sort of safety override. In our case, it's the on-off switch. So make sure you put that on there. It kind of comes from back in the day. Some of the remote starts, if you disconnected a battery and hooked it back up, it would automatically start the remote start sequence, and that can be dangerous if there's no override. Most of the systems within the last 15, 20 years don't do that, but there's always a possibility. So make sure that you put in some sort of safety override and let your mechanic know, you know, that you've either got a switch like that or you've got a, if you want to do a pin switch underneath the bed so it can't start if the bed's up, whatever, put something in there and let them know. So from here, it's just put stuff back together and it's good to go. All right, so I hope that helps you guys out if you had questions on how to do a remote start or remote start specifically in the Uforce 1000. I realize it's kind of a novelty item, but you know, why not, I guess. If you do have a cab on your rig like I've got on mine, it is kind of nice, you know, just like a truck, to be able to start it up, warm it up in the wintertime. If you like the video, make sure you hit the like button. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel. I got some more CFMOTO videos on there. Got some other stuff with some other projects I'm working on as well. Appreciate you stopping in, and if you subscribe, we appreciate that too. Got like I said earlier, a turn signal video coming up. I do have another turn signal video where I just kind of walked through it real quick after I had already installed it, but the next video is going to be more in-depth and kind of explain some of the intricacies of how I installed it, because there's been some questions from some people on that. But until then, we'll keep moving along, and catch you then. Bye.
Yeah.